When you commit to a war, like Zelensky and his government committed to this war, it becomes very difficult to admit defeat. In a way, it's like the more that you suffer, the greater the defeat, the more difficult it becomes to admit it. Because if you finally say, okay, yeah, we made a mistake, we lost this war, you're telling, the parents of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dead soldiers that, okay, yeah, that was my mistake, my bad, that's, and it's something I think it's almost impossible for a political leader to admit that kind of error. So they double down and they keep on saying, okay, yeah, maybe things aren't going so well right now, but there's this wonder weapon that's in the pipeline, or we've got this plan. We're gonna strike them. We're gonna reverse the outcome on the battlefield, and we'll be marching towards Moscow, or Moscow is actually on the verge of collapse. It's just like the sanctions will finally bite, and the Russian economy will collapse. It's all nonsense, and there's no reason to believe it. They've been saying it, for these things for 3 years, but they have to keep on saying them because, again, the alternative is, oops, a million dead people. Sorry about that. And I think it's maybe emotionally and on virtually every level, it's impossible for a leader to admit to something like that. And then it's kind of similar, you can say, within Europe. Obviously the costs aren't nearly as great for these countries. They've lost some young men, mercenaries and so-called mercenaries, people that have been sent over there. But we're talking about at the most hundreds rather than a million or whatever it is in Ukraine. But there has been economic sacrifice. There has been a lot of politicians have, really staked their careers on this, and I think it's part of the same thing. It doesn't explain it entirely. It should be easier for the Europeans to pull out of this because, they've made an emotional commitment, but it's just nothing like what the Ukrainian government has got itself into. So yeah, I think you have to look at this. I think you really do have to talk about some sort of, about delusion, this obsession with moral purity in the sense of them being superior in every way. They really bought into the neocon vision, and now they're, even when their master is seems to be turning away from it. They have the zeal of the convert, and again, part of that vision is that no, we are number one. We are the most powerful alliance in the world. It's just not possible. We really cannot countenance the possibility of a Russian victory. That cannot happen. And so if things are not going well on the battlefield, it must not because, we misjudged our own abilities and we, underestimated the Russians, but rather we just haven't done enough. We just need to double down. And, that's the way they're talking. I mean, it's not like I'm just making this up. That's the way they talk. And they really have said things. I think I quoted, it was the Polish prime minister recently that has said, yeah, we are simply more powerful. It's just an article of faith with them. They're wedded to this ideological vision, and unfortunately, this ideological vision is just entirely divorced from reality, and they're having trouble getting out of it. Or you can explain it in a different way. They can help to build this narrative, and they become prisoners of their own narrative. There are a lot of ways to kind of express it, but I would just emphasize that in the case of the Europeans, they just seem to be extraordinarily, delusional.
Are they delusional enough to send troops? Because it keeps on coming up. They keep on talking about sending people into Ukraine, and I'm just wondering, are they one day going to do it?
Yeah. Well, it could happen. They just don't have armies that can really present, a serious threat to Russia or even offer much resistance. I know that, on paper, the British have something like 60,000 combat capable troops. But I think that's an overestimate. When you look at the actual brigades and divisions, they're just they don't have the equipment. So much of that equipment has been sent overseas, or not overseas, but rather to Ukraine. What is it? The British Navy has more admirals than it has ships. It has more generals than it has operable tanks. These are the kind of France is a little bit better off, but really not much. So anyway, yeah, they don't have it. They can send a token force that can get obliterated. What is that? And they just might. Again, it just seems like, I guess you have to say this for them. They seem to be aware, that they are aware to some extent of their weakness on some level, because they have asked again and again for a security guarantee from the U.S. They say, U.S., please, serve as our backstop. We'll go in there, but you'll be our backstop. So in other words, they're admitting that they can't do anything, that they can just be tripwire forces. And the hope against hope that, they'll draw the Americans in if they do suffer an attack by the Russians. So there is a bit of realism. I'm sure their defense departments the defense departments in Europe are telling their respective governments, hey, we just don't have many people. I'm sorry, we really can't do this.
Do you think the delusional behavior we're seeing from France and Britain has something to do with their martial history? I mean, if you go back in the past, England was that the British Empire was where the sun never set, right? They ruled the world at one point in time. And France had the Napoleonic era where, they ruled Europe. Is there some of that you think that is sort of deep set in people like Starmer and Macron? And that's one of the reasons that they just can't accept the fact that we're not as great as, our history tells us we are?
Yeah, I think there's no question about it. It's just that they, especially the Brits have taken the fall of their empire badly. And what they've done to really compensate for that is to ally themselves closely with the U.S. And they just, through their association with the U.S., they can, as they say, punch above their weight. They can pretend to be more powerful than they actually are. So, when the U.S. went to Iraq, the Brits sent in people in Iraq, same thing in Afghanistan and so forth. So they can, through their association with the U.S., and present themselves as still a major player in the world, one of the great powers. But now we see, when now that the U.S. seems to be intent on pulling out, it's just like the British lapdog is just a lapdog. That's, but they're not taking it very well. Yeah, there's some sort of, we're getting a lot of Churchillian rhetoric from Starmer. He's pretending that, okay, now is the time for Britain to perform its historic role, and yet we're hearing the same kind of thing, echoes of Napoleon in France. I think that there's a lot to be said for that. But it's so far from the reality, though, that in the end, it's just going to be comical. It may end up, well, it's comedy now. It may end up a tragedy. I don't know.